Welcome to Section 2, the value streams and processes dimension of the monitoring and event management practice. In the exam of the 20 questions, 5 questions will be from this topic. These would be a mix of understanding and application questions. The process questions, if any, will be of the understanding type, and the value stream questions of the application type. The exam syllabus requires an understanding of the inputs and outputs of each of the 3 processes, and also the key activities of each of them and the sequence of those activities, and also understand how this practice contributes to the value streams of the organization. So there are 3 processes in this practice. The first one is monitoring planning. Then we have event handling based on the plan. Then we have the monitoring and event management review, which can be periodic or triggered by certain other events. The first process of monitoring planning. This process has several objectives. In this, an element is added into monitoring. An element could be a service, a component, or a whole set of services. And also defining the priority of the element, choosing features to monitor, establishing metrics and thresholds for event classification, mapping events with the action plans and the teams responsible. So generally an element would mean it would be probably a component or a service rather than a set of services. This is the table of inputs, activities, and outputs. It is essential for you to understand this and even remember this because you may have questions around this table in the exam. Let's look at the inputs here first. In order to plan the monitoring, you would have to know the service health criteria for the various services or for the service in question that you are planning to monitor. And that will be known from the service design. Then the signed expectations with the customer, the SLA, that is the service level agreement for the service or services. Then the service performance thresholds from availability, capacity, and performance management practices, meaning during this process, the thresholds would be defined. And here there should be some input around that, not the finalized one, but some input. Then there would be certain knowledge articles that can be useful in terms of past learnings in monitoring for a similar service or a component. Then the service catalog, which is the overall set of services provided by the organization and to a specific customer. It can be mostly the current live services, but generally also includes the services which are being planned to retire or recently retired, or the services that are in the pipeline. And so the catalog will have all the services generally for all customers, and but they would be for each customer their own specific customer facing view of the service catalog. And if needed, it'll present only the current live services also. Then there'll be data about the various configuration item or components of a service. I may be using singular or plural. I might say service or services, component or components. It depends on what element or elements are being planned for. In general, the totality of all elements would need to be planned by an organization eventually. So this process could be triggered again and again for each and every element, and thus completing the planning for all those elements. The outputs, let's look at the outputs before looking at the activities. The output would be, of course, the monitoring plan for the object. We will understand soon what a monitoring plan is. The service health model, we will understand that also. And the defined type of events, the criteria for the event detection, the priority and response to the events, and then the responsibility matrix matrix for taking action for those events. There are several activities in this process. It's quite a lengthy process, so it can require quite some time to complete all the activities of this process by a group of people. So first is to define the objective of monitoring, then define what needs to be and can be monitored, then the type of events for the object of monitoring, meaning what type of events will have to be monitored, then particularly the type of events, so informational, instructional, the warning and the exception. So those are the type of events, whereas the previous step, what needs to be and can be, is about what parameters need to be monitored. for those components or services. Then the fourth step here is to define the thresholds for different type of events. And we already know what thresholds are. It's kind of a limit set to raise and to detect an event. Then defining a service health model. We will come to that soon. I've been saying that earlier also, but this time we will see it pretty soon. What that means. Then defining event correlations and rule sets. We have looked at what those mean earlier, but we'll be explaining that again and understanding them clearly. Defining the monitoring action plans or the response plans for the various events and responsible people as well for them, and defining the required capabilities of monitoring and event management tools. So there is quite a lot, quite comprehensive monitoring plan. And the same has been reflected in this workflow. So we have here, this workflow comes from a notation known as business process management notation or a BPM notation. While we won't have to be concerned about the symbols, we are more concerned with the inputs, the activities and the outputs of the process, and also the sequence of activities. And we will also see in this picture what are the outputs that come from each of these activities. It's good to know them as well for the exam. And these symbols essentially mean a message means in this notation, it means a message that goes to one specific individual. The second one is like a timer, like a periodic. So the monitoring planning is a periodic process, can be triggered every now and then. And this one is like an alert, which means it can be triggered when something goes wrong. So that can also be brought in again to do some improvement or changes to the planning. In fact, we have a separate set of processes for reviewing and improving this. But then this means that the monitoring is triggered due to some other event in the organization, for example, restructuring or something. So the meaning of event for the last third symbol is not the monitoring based event, but some other organizational event, like for example, an audit as well. Then, so let's understand all these, defining a quick look at this. I've already named these activities earlier and just read them, but quick look here, when defining the objective, we can see the output, the draft monitoring plan gets started and priorities and events as well. Then what needs to be and can be monitored, then that draft monitoring plan gets updated with this information. And the same happens into the draft monitoring plan as we move through one activity to another from left to right. Therefore, we see in the third activity, the monitoring plan and the defined types of event. Then the fourth one, monitoring plan for the object and the defined types of events, and also the criteria for event detection and priority. And fifth step, the service health model is added. In the sixth, the correlation and rule sets and the response to the events. In the seventh step, we have responsibility matrix for the events as to who will be handling. And in the last step, tool architecture, instrumentation requirements, meaning the software agents that will send the monitoring data to the monitoring engine, to the EMS system and the event management system, and any requirements for new or changed tools as well. Because in the last step, the current tool sets are reviewed. So therefore, we will have that output as well. So let us dig into all these steps. There's a lot of text in all these tables. We have 5 tables coming up for this process. Essentially, these tables explain each and every activity. So the first one is to define the objective of monitoring. By objective, we mean it's generally high level. For example, it could be monitoring an application from a compliance perspective or a customer satisfaction perspective. So, and then some narrative around that. The compliance or the customer sat can also be there in the form of a few points. So, and this happens in the service design, service validation and testing. There'll be a lot of documentation related to event monitoring and event management that will come out there. In fact, the monitoring planning happens there itself. So this defining the objective of monitoring is likely to occur during the service design, during service validation, testing that will continue as well, and also during the development of the service as well. So we have seen earlier that the monitoring discussions and planning will happen throughout. It's not just done once and kept aside. It is not that the design will happen first and then the monitoring planning. No, they all go together hand in hand. So even when the availability management, capacity management, performance management, etc., are being the capacity and performance management practice, all these are being done, there will be discussions around the monitoring planning and even the service level management practice as well during that discussion as well. So here it's indicated that the discussion should move from warranty to utility, which means the warranty should be thought about first. Generally, warranties are important from a customer perspective, user perspective, because they would like to know generally um, the availability of the service and the availability hours, the capacity, and security and continuity aspects. Then go deeper into the utility elements from a monitoring perspective. Of course, when the requirements come in, first it will be utility requirements from a customer, then the warranty. But when we do the objective of monitoring in this process, then it is better to begin with warranty and then go to utility. Because the monitoring itself will put emphasis on the warranty aspects such as availability of service and components and other factors such as continuity, capacity, and security. And then, of course, it'll have to look into the utility fulfillments as well as part of monitoring and event management. So, for example, if there's a print server, the warranty would be that it has to run during the office hours. So, first to consider that, then go into the various functionalities of the print server. And then there's another example here, cover the most obvious functionality requirements, for example, in the user stories of the application. So this is like an application example. So look into the functionalities of the application during the utility requirements discussion. And then increase in granularity, start with the key service performance at the top, then move to details and components. So for example, if you're looking at the print server, my previous example, then um, go into the server components, then, for example, CPU, the memory disks, etc. So go more detail as required and appropriate and relevant. So teams should make a list with descending monitoring priority. Now, this is about what things need to be monitored first and then more important and which are less important. Then the next is defining what needs to be and can be monitored. This means monitoring priority list items are then mapped or translated into available measurements or synthetic measurements based on available measurements. Adding measurements should be explored. Now, for the same print server example, we could say the basic measurements could be the print requests that are coming in and how many print requests are being served. But the meaning of synthetic here is to combine those metrics. So, for example, one good synthetic metric for the print server could be the requests that are pending to be served. And that can be calculated based on how many requests are coming and how many have been served. So the difference between the two will tell us how many are still pending to be served. Again, the calculation has to be done carefully because more and more requests would be still coming in. So it could be for a specific duration, these metrics. Then the third activity is to define the type of events for the object of monitoring. So here, the type of events mean the classification or the categorization, and you already know them. There are 4 types: informational, instructional, warning, and exception. And this defining the types and specific events under them depends on the nature of the service, what is expected by the customer and the users, their priorities, and so on, and the components that are involved in the service, all that. And also remember the different types of monitoring systems. You have the native ones with the software agents on them provided by the vendors. Then we have the customized in-house created. Then we have a mix of both. So it has to be practically seen whether it's really possible to implement this type of event in a specific monitoring system. Then the next, so here as an example, we could say informational event could be that the print server is running well, is running okay. An instructional event on the print server could be to check the print queue and run specific job. A warning event could be that it's running out of memory, thus slowing down the server. But the slowness is probably not visible to user. It's not an incident based on the threshold that has been set or will be set afterwards. Exception that the server is down, no response from the print server due to power issue maybe, or maybe unable to connect to the network. Then the fourth activity is the defining the thresholds for the different type of events. I was just speaking about that a little bit, but in this sequence, the thresholds come afterwards. So here, the monitoring team, together with the service or component development team, they define the thresholds for the type of events, for different types. And the same metric could be treated differently based on the service it contributes to, depending on the existing SLAs and availability, capacity, and performance requirements defined for the service or component. So here, and a good example can be thresholds for the different type of events is, so for informational, it could be that the print server memory usage is up to 80% now. The warning event could be for above 80% usage, and the exception could be for above 95%. So which means warning is between 80 and 95. So that's how the thresholds could be defined.